This is the Domestic Draft Podcast. I'm Evan Bierman here with Dan Slowick. It's going to be a great show today. I'm pretty excited. We're going to be going over the Bears' recent coaching hires and some potential Bears offseason moves with a special guest. But Dan, why don't you kick it off? What are you drinking, man?
Hey, Evan, how you doing? I have an Irish red ale. I actually got a growler of it last Friday. Stopped in there, got a growler, and it is Hannigan's House Beer Company and Creamery in National City out here in San Diego. And it's actually the only brewery, not the first, but it's the only operating brewery currently in that neighborhood. So it's in an industrial park. It's kind of, through their garage door is where everyone hangs out. It's a small brewery. It started in 2020, so it's a brand new brewery as well. And the interesting about them and kind of how they're trying to get their name out there and what they're known for is that they make ice cream as well with their beer, and their ice cream is infused with their beer.
Wow.
Yeah. So it's a cool place. Some of the flavors that they have here of their ice cream are chocolate chip mint stout, right? Strawberry chipotle red ale, blood orange saison, coconut raspberry hefeweizen, and peach blonde. So I haven't had the ice cream. I've just had this beer. The beer's name is The Color We Were Meant to Bleed. It's their Irish red. It's 5.5%, but it's a real like brand new brewery, opened up during the pandemic. And they started to, he's got one tank that he's brewing with, but the demand has been pretty high. So he's trying to expand their operation so they can keep up with the demand. And I got to try the ice cream. I haven't tried the ice cream yet, but some of those flavors sound pretty cool to go ahead and try. And it's supposed to like pair as well. You know how you can like pair like wine with like food as well, like beer with ice cream. So yeah, wow. We'll try it out.
That's interesting, man. Something I have not heard of before. Yeah. Okay. So the brewery I have here is called Alter Brewing Company. It's in Downers Grove, just outside of the city. They opened their Downers Grove facility in December of 2015. They got an open air tap room where you can see all the tanks. They also have a couple private event spaces. And then in mid 2020, they expanded, opened Alter Brewing and Kitchen. It's a full restaurant and brew house in St. Charles, Illinois. So that's a little bit further out from the city. But the beer I have here is called Popular Kid. It's an extra pale ale. It's a 6.5%er. It's a 3.72 on Untapped. It's very hoppy. It's got that tropical feel, but great hops in there. Definitely, if you like pale ales, I would say you'd love this beer. It's an easy drink. So speaking of popular kids, our next guest is very popular on Twitter. If you are a Bears fan, you definitely should be following Jacob Infante. Jacob is an NFL draft analyst for USA Today, SMG's Draft Wire. He also covers the Chicago Bears for SB Nation's Windy City Gridiron. He can be found on Twitter at Jacob Infante 24. Give him a follow if you're not already following him. But Jacob, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for being here.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you guys for having me on. I'm sorry I'm popping up off the screen here. I know that you mentioned this is going to YouTube, and for those who aren't in the loop, I told them beforehand that I've got stuff in the oven right now. So I've got some broccoli and cauliflower I'm roasting. But yeah, no, I appreciate you guys having me on for sure. I'm really looking forward to chatting with you.
All right, this is going to be fun. You got an eye on the oven and then also answering some questions about the Bears. Let's see how this goes. So we're curious, seeing your following on Twitter and seeing kind of the articles you've been releasing. We're just curious how you got started. How did your career get started? You're out there at SB Nation, Windy City. You're at the Draft Wire as well. How did you get started in all this?
Yeah, so I've been a big sports fan for as long as I can remember. Probably like 5-6 years old. And the first like full season of Bears football that I paid attention to was the year they made it to the Super Bowl back in that 06 season. And I was quickly hooked on it. And I also had a love for writing, like just writing in general. And somewhere along the line, I decided, okay, I can write about sports and I can like put my thoughts out there. So I joined Twitter like 9 years ago now, which is insane to think about. But yeah, I just started then. And after a couple of years of just tweeting and, putting my thoughts out there, I decided to just apply myself, and I made my own blog, and I got a couple of my friends to go along with it. And eventually I got asked to hop onto 2 different websites actually. And one of them was Cover 32, and it's a defunct blog now, but a handful of, decent NFL writers have gotten their start there. And I worked my way up there as like a staff writer, unpaid and all that stuff. And then I got an opportunity to write about the Jacksonville Jaguars.
There you go.
Yeah. So that was the year before they made it to the Super Bowl, not the Super Bowl, the AFC Championship.
Right.
So the year before the only year that they were good, I got to cover them.
It's good timing.
Yeah. So I was able to, keep up there for a bit, and that was cool to, be able to run my own page and like interact with fan bases and, learn from a new team that I previously had no rooting interest in. And then eventually I took over the Bears job and I held the fort there. And somewhere along the way, my boss, Lester Wiltfong, who's the editor-in-chief at Windy City Gridiron, he found my stuff and followed me. And I want to say 2017, there was like an opening for, some new staff writers at Windy City Gridiron. I'd long been a reader and a fan of the articles that were put out there. I admittedly didn't comment, so he probably the rest of the community didn't really know me that well. I was just more of a someone who would read from afar and like check out it every once in a while. And it's a very community based website, and there are a lot of people who have been basically lifers there. So it was a little bit of like an adjustment to that at first, because I'd never been a part of something that was so tight knit. But ever since then, I've been writing for Windy City Gridiron for coming up on 5 years soon in a couple months. That's
awesome.
Congrats,
man.
Thank you. And I've been loving every second of it. I've been able to attend press conferences and stuff along the lines of player interviews, and it's just been a lot of fun. And the website itself is very there's a lot of flexibility there with time and schedule. Right. Everyone has something else going on in their life that they're trying to balance, and then this is something they're doing in addition to it. So very flexible. And luckily Lester I guess trusts me enough to be able to put my own stuff out there. Nice. And more or less free reign about NFL draft stuff, and which I'm really grateful for, because Windy City Gridiron, at least in my opinion, as far as like the Bears websites out there, I truly believe we have the most diverse analysis out there, and the deepest diving analysis out there. I may be biased, but that's just my opinion of it.
Yeah.
And I'm very grateful to be a part of that. And as for DraftWire, that's the place I joined actually a year after Windy City Gridiron, and that's also been a blast. I've had the opportunity to chat with a bunch of NFL draft prospects. That NFL DraftWire is the reason I'm verified on Twitter, because without them, because they have a check mark,
right?
And I've written a handful of articles for them over a year or so.
How has that been for your career, getting that verified check mark?
Oh, it's been very helpful. I will admit. Sometimes it's kind of surreal to me, because I don't really feel like I deserve one, because I'm not like a legit, like media guy who's in there every week, like doing the job and all that. I'm just a, more or less a blogger, analyst, sure, stuff on the side, but I'm very grateful for it. And I think that once you have the check mark, it's able to, it gives you a little bit of added weight. So if people haven't heard of you before, they haven't seen you before, they'll say, oh, this guy, I guess he knows what he's talking about. So,
yeah, I guess that's kind of what that means, right? I guess.
Yeah, dude, I'm guilty of that. Trust me, I'm guilty. I want to go back to the blog that started, kind of like launched your career. What was that called?
Yeah, so that was called Second City Sports Report. It's still up. It's a WordPress site that I made with a couple of my friends, and we just do Chicago sports. I do mostly football. I have a couple buddies. Some were into baseball, some were into basketball. And that was going on when we were in high school. And, we had a lot of fun about it. We weren't really trying to like grow super hard.
Yeah.
We were just writing for the passion of it. And,
right. That's really cool.
Yeah. So that was a lot of fun. I mean, the website's still up there somewhere. I'm sure if you look it up, you'll be able to find that and, go back through the archives, so to speak.
Absolutely. So you've been a lifelong Bears fan, right? Who's your favorite Bear growing up?
Oh, shoot. Okay. Probably Brian Urlacher, I'd have to say. I'm kind of dating myself here a little bit, but I think that Brian Urlacher was my favorite guy growing up. Once I first started getting into football, he was playing at a, Pro Bowl, all pro level. And he was the face of that defense. And
oh yeah,
that's
face of the franchise at that time.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Without a doubt.
Kind of still is, which we kind of need to change that.
For any younger Bears fans listening out there, that's the guy that's on all those hair billboards.
Restore those restore. Yeah, it's insane. Do you have any so everyone's got everyone knows Urlacher. Do you have any lesser known players that you're like, man, that was just my guy, no one knew about him, or he was second string or something that you just kind of I always bring up Forsey, the running back way back when.
Yeah.
Do you have any players like that you just were fans of?
Yeah, no. This whenever I mention a handful of those receivers from the mid 2000s,
Dane Sansenbacher.
Yeah, like a Dane Sansenbacher, like a Devin Aromashadu.
Yeah.
Bernard Berrien's a guy. He started for a little bit, but a lot of those receivers, were they ever elites? Not really, but at the same time, they produced, and for Bears offenses that needed producers. So Devin Aromashadu, especially Johnny Knox, is a guy that I loved.
Yeah.
Growing up, and his career ended in unfortunate circumstance.
Yeah. Yep.
I was when he was playing, he was a lot of fun to watch. So a lot of those wide receivers were definitely guys that I really enjoyed watching growing up.
Who's your favorite coach of your lifetime?
Oh, okay. So when I started watching football, Lovie Smith was the head coach. So, no Ditka here, no Hallis, no, Wenstedt, Dick Duran, whatever.
Dick Duran, yeah. Jeez.
Yeah. So I'd probably go with Lovie. That's a pretty popular opinion, I feel like, for people who, are within my age range, a little bit older, a little bit younger. I think that, Lovie he brought the Bears to the Super Bowl.
Yeah.
He was, such a force behind that defense, and, the personnel was amazing, obviously, but the scheme was fantastic, and they brought in the right guys for that scheme. And it was just so much fun to watch that defense. So I'd say Lovie, and simply because the coaches after that, it's been, not necessarily the best.
I mean, yeah, we were talking about this pre-show before you came on about, the obvious answer is probably Lovie Smith for most, right? In the modern era of Bears football. And that we were talking, Matt Nagy, Evan was looking it up and said it very similar, win percentage to Lovie Smith. And then the question kind of came up, did Matt Nagy get a bad rap, or were we too harsh on him, or did he get what he deserved?
Yeah, so it's a loaded question. I feel like in the grand scheme of things, he was better than a Mark Trestman. He was better than a John Fox. And we should be able to look back on that and say, okay, yeah, he wasn't as bad as those guys. I do feel like he was given a very talented roster and didn't maximize it. Mm-hmm. I think that in terms of the quarterback position, that ultimately lies mostly on Ryan Pace, because, Mitch Trubisky ultimately wasn't what they wanted him to be.
Right.
And I think that mostly comes down to that decision that Pace made to trade up for him and select him, make him the face of the franchise. But at the same time, I do think that Nagy could have, gone about things differently. I think that the scheme that he ran didn't play to Mitch's strengths, and I think that hindered his play and his development a little bit. And that's not to say I think Mitch could have been a franchise quarterback with a different coach, because I think that at his best, he would have been an okay starter. Like we saw in 2018, he made it to the Pro Bowl. He had a solid enough year. I mean, granted, it was as a fifth alternate or something, but he wasn't bad.
The Nickelodeon MVP.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's a prestigious thing. Look on freaking Pro Football Reference. The MVP is right there. So
yep.
Is it on there? That's hilarious.
It is, yeah. I think they have it for Dak Prescott too. I'm not 100% sure, but I know for a fact they have it for Mitch.
Well, Mitch earned it. Dak just got it. Mitch earned it.
Yeah.
All right, let's pivot to this team. I'm assuming you caught that introductory presser the other day.
Yeah.
What were your thoughts on that? Was there anything that was said that caught your attention, or was a lot of it coach speak, do you think?
I do think a lot of it was coach speak, and those types of press conference I don't really put a lot of stock into. But one thing is that Eberflus isn't going to be calling plays for the defense, and that he's going to be more so in an overseer CEO kind of role, which I think is going to be interesting to see how that plays out. And honestly, I think it might be a change worth considering, because we've seen when Matt Nagy took over play calling, there were instances where he might have appeared overwhelmed or something, or he wasn't able to fully look over the discipline of the team. And I think that resulted in a handful of, injuries and, dumb plays that resulted in timeouts or, what have you. So I think Eberflus not calling plays for the defense is one. I think Ryan Poles stressing the importance of an assistant GM, and he mentioned that they want to maximize the picks that they have and look to build upon the draft capital they have. So that's pointing heavily, in my opinion, to trading down at some point, which I'm personally all for.
Mm-hmm.
That's one gripe I had with Ryan Pace. I actually liked Ryan Pace as a evaluator of collegiate talent. I think he had his fair share of diamonds in the rough that he was able to come up with, more than probably the average GM, but he just traded up all the time. And there was, so little draft capital to work with that. Sure, they had some talented young players, but the quantity just wasn't there. So I'm hoping that Ryan Poles can be able to, add some more young talent around Justin Fields and around this core that they have in place.
Right. You mentioned like the importance of hiring that GM, and that was going to be my next question. I don't remember a Bears regime having an assistant GM in the long. I mean, maybe they didn't have that name or that title, but people were doing that kind of job. But how important is that? Because I always, I'm a big Bulls fan, and I always look at like how great this recent restructuring of the front office is, with AK being the president and then being able to hire a GM, and then they're hiring a bunch of people in that front office to be specialized at their individual task. Is this something we're going to see with this front office? Are there going to be more people that Poles is going to bring in to put around him as a first-time GM? And what are we going to be seeing with this? Like, how are they all going to like come together in their tasks that they're doing together?
I'm losing my shit right now, because the guy's clearly making dinner here, Dan, and you're asking him like this 10-part question here. So I have no doubt that Jacob understands what you're asking there, and he's going to give you a great answer here. But I just thought that was hilarious. Sorry, if you're not watching this.
YouTube, and I apologize if that's coming off like rude or anything. Like, I promise that
absolutely not, dude. No,
I promise that I'm digesting what you're saying. But yeah, I just want to check, because it's been a little bit. It's almost there. So
broccoli's a little finicky. There's a fine window between when it's done or when it's overcooked.
Exactly. So I apologize for that.
You're
I didn't time that super well on my end, but yeah, to answer your question, I think that if I'm not mistaken, this is the first time the Bears have had someone with that bona fide assistant GM role. So it's going to be interesting to watch. And I think that having some higher ranking executives around him, having some more guys who can necessarily specialize in specific things. I know Ian Cunningham, who's, the new Bears assistant GM, he specializes more in collegiate scouting. That's what his background is. Ryan Poles also comes from that collegiate scouting background. I think that time will tell over the next couple of weeks. I wouldn't be surprised if they look to add some higher ranking pro personnel guys. Ryan Poles also mentioned that they might revamp their analytics department, which they didn't really have too much of under Ryan Pace. They didn't have an extensive staff. If I'm not mistaken, I think they only had one guy with the title of analytics in his titles. Wow. That'll be.
Do they have anyone like with salary cap? Because I feel like that's such an asset to have in the front office.
Yeah. So if I'm not mistaken, I'm blanking on the name right now, but they did have someone who more or less specializes in salary cap. And Ted Phillips does oversee like the, financial business decisions that take place in the organization. But I do definitely expect that, salary cap guru, so to speak, it's in the cards. And I'm interested in seeing what happens with the scouting department, what happens with the rest of the coaching staff, obviously. But, the Senior Bowl is going on right now in Mobile, Alabama, and the Bears don't have all their collegiate scouting guys in order. So I'm really interested in seeing how this process goes and just more or less where they're at once the whole draft process starts to pick up a bit more.
And the follow-up there too, you kind of were already adding to it, is what are your expectations for filling out this coaching staff? Who do you think they're going to hire to be that defensive coordinator? Joe Brady's been out there as possible quarterback coach. Any other names you're seeing, a special teams coordinator, anybody you're seeing for any of these positions that are vacant?
Yeah. So I know that there was discussion about Rich Bisaccia, the Raiders special teams coordinator, who ended up being the interim head coach there. And there hasn't really been much discussion on that since like a couple days ago, but I hazard a guess that it's still in the running, especially considering the fact that Bisaccia didn't retain the Raiders head coaching job. So, I wouldn't be surprised if he tries to look elsewhere for employment.
We'll see if McDaniels follows through, I guess, right?
Yeah. Yeah. If he doesn't back out
again.
Yeah. But yeah, no, I think Bisaccia is a guy that's been mentioned. I think that for defensive coordinator, if I'm not mistaken, I think it's Alan Williams who's been mentioned. He's been the safeties coach for the Colts,
right?
The last couple of years, and
I see Rod Marinelli possibly too for like the D line coming in.
Yeah. So Rod Marinelli, he's currently under contract with the Raiders, but now that they have a new head coach, you never know what's going to happen. And Rod Marinelli has those ties with Matt Eberflus.
Right.
Eberflus came, up through the ranks underneath Marinelli. So for it to all come full circle, I definitely think that if Marinelli doesn't stay in Vegas, I think he's involved in Chicago in some capacity. I'm saying that not necessarily with like an inside source, but that's just my gut feeling,
right.
Connecting the dots and, the NFL, it's a big connections thing in coaching staff and in just general managers and that whole staff. It comes down to connections. So I think that Rod Marinelli, considering who he knows, I wouldn't be surprised if he's involved with the Bears at some point.
What do we think about Getsy with Justin Fields? I did not know much about Getsy at all. Dan, I don't know if you did, but I wasn't familiar with him at all. So I'm
curious. He was
a
passing game coordinator in Green Bay, which is a weird position. Not necessarily the offensive coordinator, but just looking at the passing game. But anyone who works with Aaron Rodgers has to come with a lot of knowledge, I would assume.
Yeah. So it's an interesting situation. So I don't think that I don't think that Nathaniel Hackett, the offensive coordinator for the Packers, who's now the head coach of the Broncos, I don't think he called plays. So you're talking about the guy who's underneath that. So Luke Getsy doesn't have, experience at that NFL level calling plays. So I'm very interested to see what aspects of Matt LaFleur's offense, of that Shanahan tree, is going to be brought in. So I really don't know totally what to expect out of Luke Getsy, but I'll just say personally, the Shanahan scheme is probably my favorite in football. I'm a big fan of the pre-snap movement, of, bootlegs, getting quarterbacks on the move, the use of RPOs, the zone blocking, I guess, to speak. I think that there's a lot to like in that system. And it's just a matter of personal opinion of what Getsy wants to bring. Say, okay, I'm going to include this. I'm not going to include this from the Shanahan, LaFleur offense, whatever you want to call it. But by all accounts, he did a really good job in Green Bay. I mean, he was the wide receivers coach when Devontae Adams was developing, and Devontae praised Getsy for a lot of the work that he did into making him the player he is now. And Aaron Rodgers said that he's helped him out tremendously, especially in RPOs, because he didn't have a ton of experience with that earlier on in his Packers starting career. But once Getsy got into the fold, they were able to, work a little bit, add a little bit more RPOs into that offensive system. So I'm excited. I'm a little bit curious because I don't know exactly what's going to happen with that, but I'm optimistic, to say the least.
I hate that we're going down this storyline again of rookie quarterback first, new coach, new OC, and then second year, boom, new coach, new OC, got to learn it all over again. Oh, it's not his fault. He's adjusting. Then it's going to be year 3. And we did this with the last quarterback we drafted in the first. I just hate that we're doing it again. I'm being pessimistic. Maybe I should be more optimistic. Maybe it's all going to work out.
Yeah.
But just being a lifelong Bears fan, I just know it never does. So speaking of this like new regime and all the moves that they possibly can make, like, what do you think? How can they put their fingerprints immediately on this roster or on this franchise? What do they need to do to be like, all right, this is a new era of Chicago Bears football, and it could be their style of play. It could be maybe a player roster change that they get. Like, what do you think they need to do to put their imprint on this franchise?
You see, that's a good question.
It's a lot, right? It's like, they need to do a lot
out here. So to me, it comes down to 2 things. I think it would have to come down to maybe overhauling the age of the roster. Like, there are a handful of more expensive veterans, just trying to find a way to move on from them to free up more cap space and to open up opportunities for younger guys. You're looking at Danny Trevathan, Nick Foles, potentially Eddie Goldman. You're looking at as guys that you could realistically end up cutting or trading or what have you, to free up some money and to get younger and maybe more dynamic on both sides of the ball. And another thing is, I think investing in the offensive line, which I fully expect the Bears to do in maybe these next 2-3 off seasons. I think they're going to go all out. And especially considering Ryan Poles is a former collegiate offensive lineman. Ian Cunningham's a former collegiate offensive lineman. That's your 2 biggest front office guys with that offensive line mentality. And Poles, I keep saying Foles instead of Poles. That's not the first time. That's not going to be the last. But yeah, I think Poles is he indicated during his press conference that he's, an offensive line guy, and he wants to, revamp that, so to speak. So I think that signing someone in free agency, there are a lot of centers that I think could make an impact for this offense, a handful of guards as well, and maybe move some guys around, because the report saying that the Chiefs didn't necessarily view Tevin Jenkins as a left tackle. Maybe they put him at right tackle. Maybe they even put him at guard. I don't know. But I think that there's going to be a new look offensive line next year. I know that much. I don't know that much. I'm assuming that much.
Yeah.
And that I'm expecting them to move on from a handful that are more expensive contracts and, look to get younger on both sides of the ball.
Gotcha.
So who's like a big franchise name that's not going to be on the roster next year?
Shoot. Okay. So I don't like saying this because I think he had a really good year this year, and he was arguably the most valuable player on the Bears this year, but I wouldn't be totally stunned if Robert Quinn gets dealt, because
all-time high value right now.
Exactly. Like, his value is not going to get higher than it is right now. He's realistically an expensive player who's over 30, and he's probably never going to do better than he did this year ever again in the rest of his career. And it sucks because he was insane this year, and he was so much fun to watch. And Khalil Mack and Robert Quinn, I feel like we haven't been able to fully unlock that potential as a duo over the last 2 years, because, Robert Quinn was dealing with injuries last year and his play was affected, and Mack was out for half the year basically this year. So it's unfortunate, but I could see that happening to free up some money to get some draft capital, maybe like a 3rd, 4th round pick. I know that doesn't sound super sexy, but considering the age and the contract, that's probably the best you get in a Robert Quinn deal. And then just run with Mack and Trevis Gibson off the edge, because Trevis Gibson did really well this year in a rotational role. And once Mack got hurt, he stepped into the lineup and was able to get some sacks. So I wouldn't be totally mad with doing that with Mack and Gibson, and then using an extra 3rd round pick on a wide receiver or an offensive lineman, or, a cornerback maybe. So there are a lot of different ways they could go. I don't know for sure if they're going to move on from Quinn. I think that would be a tough sell to the fan base, but I do think it's a possibility.
Is there any chance they trade Mack?
Maybe, but I don't think so. I think Quinn is more likely to get dealt at this point. I think that Quinn's contract is more easily movable in terms of trading. And I don't know. I think that Khalil Mack, you might not be able to get as much for him as he's worth to your defense right now. So it's a possibility. I'm not going to say there's a 0% chance that it happens, but I'd personally lean that it's not going to happen though.
Yeah. So Jacob, you put out this article on Windy City Gridiron earlier today, actually, with your free agency and draft predictions for the 2022 offseason. So there's a couple free agents that caught our eye. Number one, Michael Gallup. I think, every Bears fan is looking for that wide receiver that's going to replace Allen Robinson. There's a couple big names out there, obviously Devontae Adams, Chris Godwin, and then Gallup's, I think, the tier below them, I think, but I think, still a great player. I would love to see him in a Bears uniform. That's the guy that you think you would pick out of that group that would take Robinson's spot? Could he be a number one wide receiver, or is he more, that dynamic duo with Mooney, and maybe you just have two really great number twos?
I pause at dynamic duo with Mooney. I just pause at that. It's just a Chicago Bears fan. I think you put Mooney up across the board with a lot of receivers. He's not that dynamic, but he's dynamic in Chicago because our receivers are so bad.
Yeah, I mean, that's fair. I feel like that's part of the reason that I liked some of those receivers in the late 2000s, early 2010s that I was talking about, because they're dynamic by Chicago standards, and that's not knocking them as much as it is knocking the franchise for not surrounding your quarterbacks with that type of talent. But yeah, with Michael Gallup, I think that he's the type of guy who isn't necessarily being utilized to the best of his abilities in Dallas. And obviously when you have Amari Cooper and CeeDee Lamb to battle with, and Dalton Schultz and Ezekiel Elliott, go on and on and on. Cedric Wilson, even.
He's not bad. Yeah. Cedric Wilson.
Yeah. A lot of talent on that Dallas offense that Gallup's competing for touches with. And we're saying that, but he also already has 1,000-yard season under his name. And he just in 2020, he had like over 800 yards. And obviously he got hurt this year, so he didn't put up nearly as good of stats as normal, but you're still looking at a high-end number two receiver. And realistically, I don't think Devontae Adams is attainable for the Bears, just because of, sure, they do have cap space, but they have a lot of needs to fill and a lot of roster spots, because they have, I want to say, somewhere between like 20 or 30 guys under contract heading into this offseason. So that's close to half of your roster that you need to fill in one offseason. So they've got a lot of work ahead of them. And for that, I don't think they're going to make maybe that splash signing like a Devontae Adams, like maybe a Chris Godwin or a JC Jackson from the Patriots, that cornerback. I think he's going to get a ton of money. But I do think Gallup is a bit more attainable. He'll be expensive, no doubt, but I think that you've got the ACL tear factoring in. It can be an A-Rob situation where, you bet on his past ability and maybe get him at a discount, like a 3-year deal or something. And then you're looking at a potential very good contributor for your offense. So I wouldn't be mad at all if the Bears sign Gallup. I'd actually be quite pleased, but I think some other guys you're looking at, maybe Christian Kirk this offseason. I think he's another receiver that the Bears would be wise to look at, because
he had a great year. Yeah.
Oh yeah, he did.
Kirk did.
And he's a very good talent out of the slot. I don't think the Cardinals bring him back because they have Rondale Moore who can play there. So you're looking at Christian Kirk, have him in the slot, Mooney on the outside, and then you have one more starting receiver spot along the outside. You're looking for a boundary, bigger receiver. That's someone you can get in the draft, like a David Bell.
Who is it? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Of course, he was next on our list here.
I was going to say, the guy. Before we start talking about him, I just want to bring up, we're talking about future offense here, and in the presser, right? Poles and Eberflus both said you're going to see players that are fast. That's what we're going to focus on. We're going to be fast. One of the fastest players this roster had and quick twitch was Cohen. And we're also talking about a player in Gallup who had ACL, and he's going to come back and he's going to be all right. And it is that's how modern athletes are the trend is going. You get an ACL, it's no longer career threatening. It's pretty good. You're going to be back stronger than ever. What's going on with Cohen? Is he cut? Is he going to be a part of this offense? Because that dude was the change of pace, the scat back, the guy you could put out in the flats and bail you out on a broken coverage on the line and just get you 5, get you 10. Was it way worse than we thought? Like, what's going on there? Because that guy was fun to watch. Bears fan loved him. He was electric, and he hasn't played in 2 years.
Yeah, so I think the whole situation with Tariq Cohen really sucks because, like you said, he was incredible to watch. He's such a valuable part of that offense. And I think that when he went down not this past year, 2021, but the year before, the offense didn't really know what to do because they relied so heavily on him to be that check down sort of guy. And to move him around in the offense, having the backfield, the slot out wide, what have you. He was huge, and the offense didn't really have much of an identity without him, much less with him. But unfortunately, I do think he's cut this offseason. I think that you're looking at a running back who, at least by running back standards, is making a decent amount of money, and someone who hasn't played in 2 years. And coming off of that injury, I think the fact that he didn't play this year, it shows more or less that, okay, his time in Chicago is probably up, because I don't expect new management to be willing to wait and to take on that contract, which isn't even all that much in the grand scheme of things. But again, when you consider you have David Montgomery and Khalil Herbert on rookie contracts right now, Cohen becomes a bit more expendable in that sense. So I honestly think Cohen's gone. And at least in my mock offseason, I had them bringing back Jakeem Grant. So he, fill that kick return, punt return role. So, you're still in very good hands there. I mean, you're talking Pro Bowl, All Pro type of guy right there. But I don't know. I do think that Cohen's going to play again. I think he'll end up somewhere. And I think that a different NFL team is going to be willing to take a chance on him for, like a vet minimum deal, because he's still going to be making like probably $2-3 million off.
God, he's going to end up in New England, isn't he? And he's going to be awesome. He's going to end up in New England.
You draft him on your fantasy team, Dan. I'll let you take that risk. All right.
He's going to be awesome.
All right. So let's get back to David Bell, because I'm very interested in this pick. It's somebody that you seem to be very interested in as well. Dan and I were talking before the show too about the last 2 Bears wide receivers that were drafted early. Drafted in the first round, Kevin White in 2015, David Terrell in 2001. Yeah. We do not have a good history with drafting wide receivers early. Anthony Miller, I think we traded up to draft pretty high too.
Yeah.
Is this guy, what makes him special? Why do you like him so much? Could he be a prototypical wide receiver 1 for this team? What are your thoughts? Give us the pitch for David Bell.
Okay, so I feel pretty confident in this because I've basically made half of my Twitter brand at this point the fact that I like David Bell. So I'm glad that people are catching on and that they're noticing that. But yeah, I think with David Bell, you're looking at a guy who, he might not be like a top 5 receiver in the league, but he can be a quality wide receiver 1. That's what you're looking at with his ceiling. I think that you're looking at a bigger bodied guy who's about 6'2", over 200 pounds. He's physical at the catch point. He has that ability to come down with catches in tight windows. And I think that's something that the Bears struggled with this past year, because they went with such a speed heavy, receiver room, and they ran a lot of hitches, a lot of shorter routes that relied on those contested catch situations, and they didn't have the personnel to pull it off. And, that goes on Nagy for not adjusting that accordingly, but that also goes on Pace for not really having, outside of Allen Robinson, who himself wasn't, as good as he normally has been. But that also lies on Pace for not, adding his now physicality and size to the receiver room. So David Bell brings size, he brings physicality. He's the type of guy who you can just have him run slants most of the game, just throw him the ball, and more often than not, he's going to come down with it. But he's so much more than that. He's a talented route runner, and he's not the greatest, like, pure speed guy out there. I think he's going to run somewhere in the 4 5s, which it's not the sexiest time out there.
Yeah, so I think Cooper Kupp's a 4-5 guy. All right. Yeah. So that's fine.
Yeah. So you can succeed with that time, but I think that, 4-5, that might knock him out of the first round, but you're looking at someone who's very, shifty coming out of the breaks, someone who knows how to attack that leverage and man coverage. You can look at a defensive back see how their hips are aligned and say, okay, this is their blind spot. I'm going to attack it to the best of my ability. So, maybe if you're running a slant, okay, I'm going to drift outside, open their hips a little bit, and then I'm going to cut inside to be able to, exploit them. And that's something I think David Bell does very well. And I mean, sure, he's probably not going to be the most elite guy after the catch. He's not going to be a Tyreek Hill by any means, but he's a steady, reliable, consistent receiver. And that's something I really like. I liked similar traits out of Rashad Bateman out of Minnesota.
I was going to say it sounds like you're kind of talking about Bateman. And I'm thinking, down the line, is he Michael Thomas good? I like, who was your comp for him? Can you give me a name or who you think he could be?
Okay. So this is a bit tough. I would say Rashad Bateman, but admittedly that seems like a little bit easy, I guess you could say. One guy that comes to mind, and I know that this guy's a bit bigger than David Bell, but Marquise Colston, the former Saints receiver, is someone that I see when I watch David Bell. I think that you see the size, the physicality at the catch point, the craftiness to get open. Maybe not the fastest guy out there, but he's enough of a technician that he can get the job done. And Marquise Colston was never necessarily an elite receiver, but he was very good.
Solid. Yeah, solid
during his time with the Saints. And didn't have any Pro Bowls, if I'm not mistaken, but he topped 1,000 yards. I have the list up right now. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 times. 6 times had over 1,000 yards and had over 900 2 times. So that's a good receiver if you can get that in the second round. So I'm going to say somewhere between Rashad Bateman and Marquise Colston. I think that's where you're looking at with David Bell.
Love it. I'll take it.
Yeah, we need some dynamics on the offense. We need to see something progress there. Obviously, with Justin Fields being our quarterback, do you see them then going heavily on the offensive side of the ball during the draft, or how do you see this front office attacking this draft? Is it going to be balanced, or what do you think?
Yeah, so I'm not 100% sure, because if the draft were right now, I'd say it'd be more offensive based, but I do want to see what they do in free agency. So in the case like what they did in my mock off season, where I have them signing Rams center Brian Allen, I have them signing Michael Gallup. Those are 2 pretty big needs that you fill right there. And then re-signing James Daniels, maybe then you have the opportunity to go more defense in those middle rounds. Like if the Bears switch to a 4-3 and if they cut Trevathan, they're going to need another linebacker or 2. Even if you run out of the nickel most of the time, when you're in base, you have 3 off-ball linebackers. You need to get someone to fill those roles.
Right.
So linebacker, cornerback. I mean, the only guy I feel super secure with right now is Jalen Johnson at corner. And Thomas Graham showed some promise, but that's such a small sample size. You can't go into an offseason and say, okay, I absolutely think this guy is going to be our starting nickel, because that's what they did with Kindle Vilder and Duke Shelley. They had such small sample sizes and they bet on them. And especially for a late round pick, that's super risky. So I think that this Bears regime learns from that, and they're more, going to attack the cornerback position a bit more aggressively. And maybe even safety. Who knows? I don't think they're going to go super high with safety, but I do think they'll look to either retain Tashawn Gibson or they can look for someone in middle round. So I can't definitively say for sure. I do think, like I said, if the draft were to happen right now, I think it would be more offensive leaning, but ultimately, I think that could change as the offseason progresses.
All right. So then last question before we get you out of here, who wins the Super Bowl?
Oh man. Okay. So I'm going to go with the Rams, and
okay,
I'll admit I'm probably going to be rooting for the Bengals, honestly, because I mean, I'm enthralled with them.
World's going to be rooting for the Bengals.
Exactly. Like, who isn't in love with the Cincinnati Bengals at this point? Which that's such a weird sentence to say, because whenever think of, oh, what's the coolest team in football? Oh, the Cincinnati Bengals. You never say that. You've never said that. But no. You're saying that now. Joe Burrow's proven, I'd say arguably now he's already an elite quarterback. And Jamar Chase is playing at an extremely high level as a rookie. That offense is so much fun to watch, and that defense is doing well enough to, the point that they're able to contend within these games with legit proven teams. So with that in mind, though, I do think the Rams are the more superior team. I think they're better coached. I think that they have more talent on the defensive side of the ball. And if they're not as explosive on offense in terms of pure personnel, they're evenly matched. You know, you got Matthew Stafford, who's still a very good quarterback. He's had his ups and downs, but when you get him going, he's a great guy, a great player. And Cooper Kupp, offensive player of the year candidate.
Oh, don't talk about Cooper Kupp with Evan around.
He's the MVP in my book, but
it's his guy.
That's a different conversation. That
I know. And then like Odell's been playing out of his mind this playoffs. I mean, that's going to be a tough offense for this Bengals defense to stop. So as much as I want to go Bengals, I mean, I just got to go with the Rams here. I think that they're the superior team.
All right, there you go. Put your money on the Rams. Thanks so much, Jacob. You can find him on Twitter at Jacob Infante 24. As I mentioned, he put out an article today about the Bears offseason with his free agency and draft predictions. Check it out on WindyCityGridiron.com. Thanks again, Jacob.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
Yep.
Yeah, thanks for being.
All right. Thanks so much to Jacob Infante. Again, he's on Twitter at Jacob Infante 24. Give him a follow if you're a Bears fan. If you're not following him already, you need to be. All right, Dan. So, we asked Jacob who he thinks is going to win the Super Bowl. Who do you got, man? And, how did you do last week with your picks?
Thanks for asking. Before I get into who I got, I predicted the Super Bowl. If you listen to last week's episode, what, are you going to say something? If you listen to last week's episode, I picked Cincinnati and, I picked the Rams. And throughout this whole entire playoff run, actually, I've only had 2 picks that didn't go my way. It was the Cowboys when they went ahead and lost, and it was the Bills when they lost to the Chiefs. So those are my 2 outs this whole entire playoff run. As for who I'm picking to win the Super Bowl.
Yeah, because you've been pretty good on this.
Everyone's going to pick the Rams, and the Rams are at home. But, man, I mean, they should not have won that game. McVay made some really bad decisions.
Tart dropped that interception, man.
Dropped that interception. I mean, the 49ers, who are a much lesser team, right, had it there for the taking. So the Bengals, in my opinion, are right now, they're on a heater. And this is always like my biggest thing when it comes playoff time. Your team better be playing at their best. And like the Bengals are, and the Rams are getting there. And the Rams are at home. But boy, do I want to go with the Bengals. And
I don't think the Rams home thing matters at all. There was 65% 49ers fans, they said, at that game.
It's also California. I mean, it's a little different than fucking Cincinnati going out to LA, but Bengals fans are going to show up, obviously, with this being the first Super Bowl appearance in forever. I'm going to go Cincinnati, and it's going to be, I like in my gut of gut, I think the Rams are probably going to win, but I'm going to go Cincinnati because I just think Joe Burrow is that good. And I also think Matt Stafford has something wrong with his arm. If you looked at some of those throws trying to go deep, he's not able to air it out like he once used to. So that kind of limits how they stretch the defense. And I think
a little speculation.
I think McVay is going to get in his own way. I really do. He's been here before and they lost, and he's here again. And I think he tries to outsmart himself sometimes and really steps on his own foot. So I'm going to go Bengals. And I think it's going to just grow the legend of Joe Burrow, who at the beginning of the season, I was very favorable of. Thought he was going to be one of the best quarterbacks in the league. Also with that offense with Jamar Chase, I was very favorable of as well. And they just made so many adjustments in that game last week to where they came out. I mean, against the Chiefs, I was talking to some friends watching the game. This game's over. They're up this amount of points before halftime. This game's over. I was like, a lot of game left. They score here at halftime, right? Hold them out, score first in the second. And they made those adjustments, and that defense really held up. And I think it's a team to look out for in the Super Bowl. So long story short, Bengals, man. Bengals. That's who I got. What about you?
So there's also this guy, Tim the Tap Man. I don't know if you've followed that at all on Twitter. I think he's like
every team, right?
Yeah, I think he's a professional gamer.
Is this like a little boozy jinx with like the NBA playoffs kind of thing?
I think so. I think he's just picked everything wrong. He's taking the Rams. So he might be onto something there with the Bengals. I'm a Cooper Kupp guy.
You're a little Cooper Kupp.
I had Stafford, I had Kupp, I had Matt Gay, I had Sony Michel, as you know. I was a big Sony Michel guy. Akers. I was all Rams all year in fantasy. So I'm hoping that they pull it off. I like McVay a lot, and I'm hoping that they win. Yeah, I'm taking the Rams. So that's my pick. Dan, do you have a would you rather for us this week?
I do. You ready to put your thinking cap on?
All right, let me put it on.
All right, put it on. Would you rather explore the deep ocean? I believe there's like only 20% of the ocean that we've actually discovered. Or would you rather explore deep space?
Both are pretty scary for me. I think if I was going to pick, I think it would be space. I just think that sounds more interesting to me. I don't know why.
Tell me more. Why does that sound more interesting?
There's very few people that have been to deep space, Dan. I think it would be cool to be one of those first people that are out there. What about you?
I get space, but it's just too scary for me and too like vast to where like you might just get sucked out and never come back. Deep ocean, if you have like the equipment to do it that allows it, futuristic, whatever, to have it explored, you might find like some crazy shit about this world's history, this planet's history, or animals that are down there. It's just more curious for me. I think is deep ocean than deep space, because I don't know if there's a lot of things out there. I'm not that person who's like the truth is out there, everything's out there. I don't know. I think it's just
I think there's all kinds of stuff out there. I think there's definitely other life forms out there for sure.
Same with the ocean.
All right,
there might be aliens deep down in the ocean, man.
All right, so last thing before we go, I got a fast fact before we close out the show.
What's the fast fact?
Hard Baja Blast Mountain Dew is coming our way, Dan. It's no caffeine, limited number of states, can be released late February, early March. They're also going to have Mountain Dew, black cherry, and watermelon, but Hard Mountain Dew is coming. And,
is this going to be available
this month
in stores or just at like a Taco Bell?
Yeah, no. End of this month in stores and select locations. They haven't released where, but it's coming. It's going to be 5%. Like I said, no caffeine. We'll see how this tastes. I'm just picturing Four Locos, and
that's exactly what
kind of making.
But I saw the no caffeine. I'm like, this is just Four Locos.
Yeah. So
we'll have to do a review. We'll do it on air. We'll do it for a show. We'll let you guys know how it tastes.
Absolutely. We'll get our hands on some of that. So, all right, that's been our show. Thanks again to our guest, Jacob Infante, for joining us today. For Dan Slowick, I'm Evan Bierman. You've been listening to the Domestic Draft Podcast. If you're listening on Spotify, don't forget to rate the show. You can find us on Twitter at Domestic Draft, on Instagram at Domestic Draft Podcast. Our website is domesticdraft.com, and you can watch the show on YouTube. Just search up Domestic Draft and drop us a sub. Thanks again for listening. Cheers.